Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the Home Energy Rebate Program here deep dive conversation today. We will get started in just a few minutes. We're gonna start by giving people a couple more minutes just to trickle in and join us. Thanks so much for holding on. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us today. Again, if you're here for the first time, this is our third of three sessions that we've been holding thus far in the last couple of weeks regarding the home energy rebate program. Today, we are going to be discussing the home electrification and appliance rebates specifically. And my name is Emily Salmeri. If you haven't met me yet, I am one of Oregon Department of Energy's federal grants officers working here to bring in some federal dollars to the state of Oregon for a number of different programs, such as the one we'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. All right, this slide just shows our agenda for the day. We will start out with an introduction to where the HERE funding comes from, a rough timeline of what we're looking at to get some of these rebates available to folks, some of our related programs that we're working on at the Oregon Department of Energy, and a background about Justice 40, one of the initiatives that's included in this program. I will say, if this is your third time joining us, feel free to make yourself a cup of coffee right now so you don't have to. Oh, I lost my screen. Can everybody still see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. All right. My apologies. So I'll be going over that background there, barring any other disconnects. And like I said, it'll be maybe 10 minutes or so, and then Will join me to talk a little bit specifically about the HERE program. He'll go into some details on what that program is going to entail, and open up some time for some Q&A for you all to get some of your questions answered. And then Christy will join us as well to go through some questions that we have of all of you to get some more answers on how we can help design that program. Next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. All right, before we jump in, just a quick introduction to the Oregon Department of Energy, or ODO, as you might hear us referred to if this is your first time being familiar with us. On this slide, you'll see our mission, our vision, and what we do. Our mission is to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Under what we do, you'll see the services that we provide and how we achieve our mission. And the funding opportunity that we're discussing today will help ODO support a resilient and affordable energy system, as well as a clean energy transition. Next slide, please. Okay, and for those of you who are new to using WebEx, the platform that we're on right now, here's a quick guide on this screen on how you can use some of the features. All of our attendees are off camera and muted, but our host will unmute you if we call on you to ask a question. You can see the option to raise your hand on both the right-hand side of your screen under the participants panel if you click near your name. There's also going to be an option at the bottom of your screen where you can see a visual of a hand in the reactions bar. And feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. Please just make sure to send to all panelists or everyone so that all of the ODO staff can see it and help respond. We'll also try to get to as many questions in the chat and through raised hands, but we may not have time for all of them today. I also noticed that some people have called in on the phone. If you're on the phone, you can press *6 to raise your hand and *3 to unmute yourself when we call on you, and the host will unmute you from our end. And then I also just want to make a note that we are recording today's listening session, and the recording will be posted on our website likely tomorrow or in the next coming days. Next slide, please. All right. So we'll start here with a little bit of background on the home energy rebates and where they came from. So the U.S. Congress passed a large federal package known as the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, that included a number of grants, tax incentives, and rebates to help consumers lower their energy usage and save on energy bills. The home energy rebates are actually going to be a pair of two separate but complementary grant programs that are available to Oregon from the U.S. Department of Energy. Oregon must apply for these federal dollars through a grant application process, which includes laying out a plan for how to offer rebates to residents within the state for approved purposes. And the applications could not begin until the US DOE provided the requirements of the applications and guidance and clarifications on any of the federal policies that are included. The initial guidance was released at the end of July, and many of the program policies were laid out in that federal guidance, while many are left to the individual states to determine. So pretty soon, Will is going to go over some of those specifics about the HERE program today. If you missed us talking specifically about homes yesterday, Stephanie went through a lot of the details of the home efficiency rebate program. That recording is posted on our website, as well as the presentation that we went through yesterday, so you can rewatch that at your leisure. And at some point, we'll drop in the chat the link to the website. We'll talk about it pretty frequently today, where you can find so much of this information. And so jumping back into what I was talking about with these programs, Oregon won't have the funds for these programs until the grant applications have been accepted and an award has been negotiated. So the deadline for applying for these funds is January 31st, 2025. And of course, designing the programs is going to take careful planning, but we understand that there's a lot of excitement and anticipation, and we're working really hard to have an application submitted and therefore have the rebates available much sooner. Our goal right now is to have the rebates available as early as mid-2024. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another thing that I want to just mention really quickly is that rebates are not the same as tax credits, and the IRA included both. And so there is some common misunderstanding around these two things. The home energy rebates are going to be administered at the state level, and the tax credits are administered by the IRS. So unlike the home energy rebates, the energy efficient home improvement credit is available this tax year through the IRS. Those rebates that we're going to be offering next year are going to be a reimbursement, or they'll provide a cost discount for eligible upgrades. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen there some details about those tax credits, and there's some links in there as well. Hopefully we can drop some of those links in the chat for you guys to navigate. I will mention that we are not tax professionals at Odo, so we just encourage you to talk with a licensed tax professional about this tax credit. The other thing that I'll mention, recently announced on September 27th, the IRS issued some expanded and updated guidance relating to home builders and the tax credit. So this guidance extended and enhanced the energy efficient home credit and allows builders who construct, reconstruct, and rehabilitate energy efficient homes a tax credit of up to $5,000 per home. And the volume of the home builder's credit depends on the type of home and the home's energy efficiency. So for example, a multifamily dwelling unit, contractors could receive the full $5,000 credit if the construction workers are paid a prevailing wage. Next slide, please. Okay, and on this slide here, we'll talk a little bit about some of the different home energy programs that we're working on here at Odo and how all of those programs work together. So Odo is preparing for the home energy rebates by aligning our program goals and policies from several different complementary programs. So one of the ones that we're talking about today here, and its complementary sister program, Homes, are going to be those two federal programs that can help you upgrade your home and appliances with energy saving technologies. And those programs are going to be supported by TREC, as you see there on the top, which stands for Training for Residential Energy Contractors. And that is another federal program that will help us bring funding into the state to support workforce development for the home energy rebates. We're in the process of applying for that program right now, and we'll utilize funding to provide subgrants to existing programs in our state to educate and train new and existing workers, such as electricians and plumbers, to name a few, on those energy efficient technologies. So this will help us to ensure that Oregon is prepared with a qualified workforce to implement the upgrades and appliances in the rebate program. Another complementary program, this one is a state-funded one-stop shop, as we call it here. And the legislature this last session recognized the need to streamline the approach to connect Oregonians with the available funds for these energy-related projects. So with HB 3166, they passed in the 2023 legislation. The bill tasks Odo with creating a single resource that Oregonians can use to navigate the variety of incentives and rebates available to them. The one-stop shop is directed to provide information, technical assistance, and assistance in identifying contractors and financing options related to energy efficiency incentives and programs. And then lastly, other state-funded programs that we have going on. Some of them are the heat pump programs you may have heard of. So we've got two state-funded heat pump programs. One is the Community Heat Pump Deployment Program, which is implemented by regional partners and is $10 million that offers incentives to support heat pump installations for homeowners. The second one is the Oregon Rental Home Heat Pump Program, it's a mouthful. $15 million is going to be implemented by Odo, and that's going to be supporting heat pump installations in rental homes. Next slide, please. All right, and you'll hear us talk a little bit about Justice 40, which is a big component in a lot of our federal awards right now. On January 27th, 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, which set forth prioritizing actions to tackle the climate crisis. Included was the Justice 40 initiative, which directs that 40% of the benefits from certain federal investments will flow to communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened. The home energy rebates are programs that are covered under the Justice 40 initiative, and it's Odo's intent to achieve those goals with these rebates in Oregon. I will also say that the Council on Environmental Quality was tasked by the White House with defining disadvantaged communities, and they used a number of data sets to show the communities that are most overburdened and underserved in the following categories: fossil dependence, energy burden, environmental and climate hazards, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. Some examples include housing and energy costs, low income, lack of indoor plumbing, and wildfire risk. That's just to name a few. And these communities are determined at the census tract level, which are small units of geography. The boundaries for those statistical data is determined once every 10 years by the US Census Bureau. Additionally, I'll mention that lands within the boundaries of federally recognized tribes are also included. And if you're interested in exploring the map that the Council on Environmental Quality created, there is a link there for the CGES map, for short is what we call it. And you can explore that tool to look at those different census tract designations. And now when we go to the next slide, I'll hand it over to Christy Split, our moderator today.
Thanks so much, Emily, for sharing some of the basics on kind of the context, I suppose, for the program we're about to talk in depth about today. So I wanted to just quickly kind of set the tone for our conversation today. I have a feeling that several of you have been with us since last week when we had our kickoff, and then we also had a meeting on the sister program to the HERE program yesterday. And so you may recall that the first time we were asking folks to kind of stay out of the weeds or the technical details in order to make sure that the program or our conversation was accessible for everyday Oregonians. Today, we ask you to go ahead and get into those weeds. Please give us the technical details that are on your mind. We really also need that information from you in order to get our work done. So go ahead and get as complicated as you want, use all the acronyms, all that good stuff. We might ask you questions to help clarify for ourselves, but the door is open on that. And then we also just wanted to kind of make clear that we'd prefer not to ask specific questions or answer specific questions about specific projects in this forum. I'll put in the chat when I'm done talking in a minute. The email addresses for the two folks that are leading the work and putting together these applications, Stephanie and Will, who you'll hear from in just a second. And they're happy to answer project-specific questions or individual-specific questions to the extent that they can via email. So with all of that said, my other request is this. The more that we can have folks raise their hands to participate versus in the chat, I think that makes for a more interesting conversation. So we really encourage you to go ahead and verbally participate. If you really don't want to, the chat's totally fine. And we also can get the chat and like pull it out as a document at the end of this conversation. So it's super helpful to us to have things in the chat too. So I wanted to just say, as we get going here, that we're happy to take questions about kind of what's on the slide in front of you, as Will in just a second goes through the program a little bit more. And then we have a series of questions to help us have a conversation with you about some of the details of the program that we need to get input from you about. And then finally, at the very end, there's sort of a general slide that's more like free flowing. If you have questions that didn't get answered before or anything that didn't come up during the conversation that you want to make sure we hear about. So now that you kind of know what's ahead, I'll keep an eye out for hands raised or for chats in order to lead us through a conversation here. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Will. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And we can jump ahead to the next slide. I'm going to cover some background on the HERE program, and it'll be pretty similar to what I presented last week for those of you that were in attendance. But if you weren't there, hopefully this is helpful in kind of orienting you to the program. So my name is Will Mulhern. I'm an energy analyst at the Department of Energy, the Oregon Department of Energy. I'll be covering the HERE program, and so that stands for the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program. This is a point of sale rebate program for electric appliances and associated electric and weatherization upgrades. It is income qualified, so that's a big difference from the homes program, and only households below 150% of the area median income are eligible. Households below 80% of the area median income are eligible for rebates that cover the full project cost up to $14,000, and then there's individual limits on specific technologies that we'll cover in a subsequent slide. And then households between 80% and 150% are eligible for 50% of project costs, but have that same cap of $14,000 and also have the individual appliance caps that we'll review in a few moments. I want to note this program is for all types of housing, including rental housing and multifamily buildings. And I'll also note that this program is not retroactive per the rules laid out by the US Department of Energy. So you may remember some discussion around retroactivity for the homes conversation. That's not applicable to HERE. We don't have the option there. So just wanted to say that up front. And we can jump ahead to the next slide. Awesome. So just a little more context. What is electrification? Obviously, it's in the title of the program, so I want to be clear what I'm kind of referring to here. So the title of the program, the terminology comes from the U.S. Department of Energy. And so they've identified this as an electrification program. A little more background on that. Electrification refers to changing the source of energy from combustion of a direct fuel to electricity. The most straightforward example would be switching from a gas furnace that combusts gas to generate heat to a heat pump, which uses electricity to heat a space. Electrification is widely accepted as a key component of decarbonization and emissions reduction plans. And while some forms of electricity generation emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, Oregon has plans in place to reduce these emissions to meet the various targets we have in the state. So the idea is that we electrify end uses and we simultaneously focus on making our grid cleaner to reach our greenhouse gas emissions targets. Yeah, so I'll leave that at that. We can talk more about that if anyone's interested, but generally this terminology comes from the U.S. Department of Energy. So eligible here measures, I had mentioned I'd show you the specific kind of individual appliance rebate limits, and that's what you're seeing on the slide here. This comes directly from the program guidelines. So you can see most appliances are covered, along with materials to support efficiency. In the far right column, you can see the maximum rebate amount for each piece of equipment. So in total, the total amount available to a single household is $14,000. However, you remember that for households with income between 80 and 150% of the area median income, you can only get a rebate that covers half the project cost. So for a more concrete example, if you install an $8,000 heat pump, your income is below 80% of the area median income, you will get the full $8,000 rebate. If you're between 80% and 150% of the area median income, you'll get $4,000 for that rebate. So that's 50% of the cost of the heat pump, which would be $4,000 in that case. However, the maximum amounts per appliance and per household are the same regardless of income level. So it's just a matter of whether the rebate can cover the full amount or only half the project cost. I will maybe open it up briefly for questions there, because I know that that's an important point to understand is the different rebate limits and then what's eligible. So I might just give it a moment to have some questions and we'll jump into the discussion portion shortly.
Yeah, we do have a hand up. Neil, I'll let you know when you're off. You could talk now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that these were eligible for rentals as well. Do you know, is the income qualification based on tenants or owners, or is there some combination?
It's based on tenants.
Okay.
For rental.
Great, thanks.
And then I'll say for a multifamily building, I believe it's a threshold. So it's the same where it's 80% and below, you can get the full rebate amount. But in a multifamily setting, 50% of that building has to be occupied by households that are below 80% of the area median income. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Will. I don't see any other questions in the chat. We can give it a minute, but Rachel has her hand up. And Rachel, you are off mute.
Wondering, when you say the max rebate amount per household, how does that rebate limit then apply to multifamily landlords who want to upgrade equipment in multiple units in one property? I'm assuming it's a $14K per unit maximum. Is that correct? So it's not a per property maximum or per owner maximum.
Correct. That amount is per household within the property. I will need to double check. There may be a separate limit that they apply on the upper end of that, but I don't think there is. I believe it's just the 14,000 per unit that you're installing the equipment in.
Okay.
So it's not per unit of the building, but it's per unit that is receiving that upgrade. So hopefully that makes sense.
Sure. Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of hands that I'll get to. Eli, I'll grab you in a second. And then Andrea after that. In the meantime, I got just a really simple question, which is just what year will be used in figuring median household income? Would it be like the last tax year, something like that?
Yeah, so we don't know for sure yet. Part of what we're going to talk about in the discussion session is how we're going to handle income verification, and we'd love feedback on that. I think realistically, so there's one tracked for verifying eligibility, and that's through what they're calling conditional verification, which is where if you're participating in a similar income qualified program that's at least as strict, if you will, as the eligibility for this measure, then you can automatically be eligible for the HERE program. So an example of that would be like the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP. For people who are not on that list or who are not enrolled in any of those programs, it would likely be some sort of previous tax year verification of their income, but we haven't officially determined which documents are going to be acceptable for income verification, but I would anticipate it will be the most recent tax year, which seems to be the standard for similar programs.
Great, thanks, Will. So we'll go to Eli now, then Andrea, and then I'll go back to the chat to Maria. Eli, you're off mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sweet. You guys went silent for a second, so I wasn't sure what was happening. Okay. I'm curious how area income is defined. Like, for instance, if somebody lives in an area that has lower income, they might be in the poverty definition for part of the state, but not the whole thing. I'm working with tribal communities, so I'm curious, like, I guess how big the radius is for income, because somebody at 150% of the income of the average income on the reservation might still be considered low income in most of the state.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start on the tribal point. That's a bit of a separate conversation. We would love to have that around supporting tribes. They also have a separate allocation for these programs, and we want to be supportive in helping them access that funding and establish their own programs, but they are also eligible for the state-run programs. And in that instance, the guidelines we have are that the area median income is set at the county level, and that comes from HUD's, the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, their definition of area median income, which uses the county level. So that's the guidance we have.
Great. All right, and then with that, oh, my list went away. I think Andrea's next, and she is off mute. They're off mute.
Was regarding the rebate percentage. Is it based on materials or both materials and labor cost?
I believe it's materials and labor cost. That's an excellent question, and we'll confirm that. But my understanding is it's the full amount that a contractor would charge for that measure. So to install that heat pump, it's the inclusive cost of how much it costs them to purchase the heat pump and install it.
Thanks.
And then in the chat, we have, what is the maximum for a needed upgrade on the control box or electrical conduit for a heat pump?
$2,500. That would fall, based on my understanding of the question, that would fall under the electric wiring on this. Yeah. Or actually, sorry, a panel would be an electric load service center, so that would be up to $4,000. And then wiring is up to $2,500. You can see it gets a little murky as far as the specific definitions of where we cut off a panel upgrade versus an electric wiring upgrade. And that's something that we'll probably need feedback on and we'll want to work through as we're designing our program specific guidelines, is kind of where one project stops and the other starts in that case.
Great. And then Jeremy Anderson, nice to see you again, Jeremy. He has a comment just noticing, and this is actually, we're going to talk about income verification down the road, but yeah, help me remember to come back to this when we talk about income verification. And then any other questions about the program? I think I got all the ones in the chat. I don't see any more hands up. There's a link to HUD's website, and then we'll get into more on income verification when we get to the discussion slides. So we can move on for now. And I'll get back to you, Jeremy, don't worry. So at this point, we are going to have those discussions I just mentioned on specific topics. So raise your hand or drop a response in the chat. Brownie points for me for raising your hand so that we can have a little more of a conversation, a little less me. And we're going to start with this question. How can the Department of Energy ensure rebates reach low income and disadvantaged communities that live in multifamily housing, such as apartment complexes, condos, or duplexes? And what considerations should be made to encourage landlords to allow for energy efficient upgrades that benefit their tenants? And again, you can raise your hand if you have ideas here or put them in the chat and I'll share them with everyone from there.
Yeah, and I might just reiterate, any feedback you have, we are interested in. And so we very much want to make sure that you feel comfortable sharing that. And as it may have been clear from me answering some of those questions, we don't have all the answers right now. And part of why we're doing this is to start to figure out how we can make progress on figuring all that out. So your input is very helpful.
Yes, no brownie demerits, just brownie points. All right, I don't see any hands up yet on this one. And I know a lot of folks have been joining us and we had this conversation yesterday too. So we might end up with a little more silence, given the nature of having kind of two conversations about such similar programs. Zach Mulholland suggests we work with renter support groups. Thanks, Zach. Good to see you again. And then Rachel has her hand up. And
Yeah,
Rachel,
I would just suggest maybe pulling together a working group with nonprofits and community-based organizations that provide affordable housing, because there's a lot of different types of affordable housing out there. And when you think about income verifications and income restrictions, it's very varied, right? I mean, we can call, and there's different definitions of regulated affordable housing out there. So in a lot of cases at like the city level in Portland, that's considered housing that has Portland Housing Bureau funding associated with it, or Oregon Housing Community Services funding associated with it. But there is also other types of affordable housing out there that don't necessarily have regulatory agreements associated with them, but are operated as very low income. So Central City Concern, the organization I work for, has a number of properties that fall under that. Both we have PHP funded housing, we have OHCS funded housing. Those are pretty clear cut, but we also have shelter housing and various other types of affordable housing that don't necessarily have those traditional regulatory agreements associated with them, but are serving folks coming in straight off the street with high needs. So I think just making sure that that definition isn't too restricted of like what regulated affordable housing is. And I think that's going to require working with different nonprofits and providers of affordable housing to determine kind of what that swath of definition should look like. So that would be my recommendation.
Great, really appreciate that, Rachel. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Luke, just something to say back.
I do, yeah. So I was also going to say I really appreciate that feedback, and that's very helpful. And I'll say for our from our perspective, we are not exclusive to I know people kind of call it like capital A affordable housing, like regulated affordable housing. We are interested in reaching low income households in whatever setting they may be in, and so that's the guidance from the program. So we're interested in all those various types of housing.
Great, thanks. Other things we've got in the chat, talking to property management companies about what would work, talking to housing authorities and municipal electric consumer utilities. We're getting ready to meet with them hopefully soon. We're trying to collect the list of the right folks to talk to from those folks. And then Chris from PSEF, who was the contractor when I got weatherization work done on my house about a decade ago. So Chris, it's very cool to see you here and that you work at PSEF. I'd seen that on the website. It's amazing. Asked if we could repeat things from yesterday. We are not skipping anything that we covered in the past at all. And it's just, I'm wondering if there'll be like a little bit less conversation today potentially. So that was all I was trying to say with that. We will not skip anything. And then just a comment that there should be plenty of demand from landlords once they figure out that most units will get free heat pumps, free panel replacements, and free ventilation upgrades. And then the next comment is related to income verification. So I'll save it for when I go back to the chat on income eligibility and verification. And with that, I don't see anything else related to this page right this second or any hands up. We can do another 20 seconds of chill time and then move on over if you'd like, or we can just move on over. That's fine too. How can Odo ensure income verification flows smoothly and is not too burdensome to contractors or recipients? Really quickly, just the most recent comment here from Nancy is that the wider the area used to figure out income levels, the more the incentives will go to those who really need it. So that was her thought there. And then going back to the comment that we got from Jeremy, many of the contractors on the line, I'm not sure how many folks on the line are familiar with the fact that Oregon just opened a rental heat pump program. It's designed after Oregon's solar rebate program that also uses the same income verification model. And contractors in the solar sector, after years of dealing with it, are seeming to be okay with it. But I think it's maybe been, it sounds like, according to Jeremy, it's been a little bumpier for the HVAC and heat pump contractors. There's a conditional system used, is what he's calling it, that it's been very difficult for landlords to kind of figure out the income level for their tenants, which when the bill was drafted, we asked the same question, but it was important that to the legislators that we figure out how to make sure that these benefits were going to low income folks. It's been just kind of a trick to figure that out. So it's definitely just interesting to see the concern, because we definitely thought of it years ago when the bill was passed. The question was, would a self-certification form work like Energy Trust of Oregon uses for savings within reach? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Well, yeah, harder to get income docs from tenants than homeowners. Totally understand. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, that it works in realm one, but maybe is harder in another area. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have we talked about that? I could say a little bit, but.
Yeah, that's just on whether self-attestation might be an option for income verification. It is included in the guidance as a possible option, and it's something we're considering and thinking through. So feedback on that is useful, whether that's been a positive or less than positive experience. There are challenges, I'll just be transparent, administratively at the state with making sure that we're able to administer self-attestation as a form of income verification, and those are certainly things we would choose to work through if that's the route we want to go, but appreciate that being brought up.
Yeah, definitely something we have looked into in the past and have been essentially told it wouldn't work within state government for the state of Oregon for us to do that. We could certainly see if something has changed, or if it doesn't matter as much when it's a federal program or federal funds. EWEB qualifies people income for their low income rebates, so it'd be nice if it could be one process. And well, you can maybe speak to us wanting to rely on existing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's our interest, is to align it with as many existing programs that have similar criteria as possible. And we'll definitely be engaging our consumer-owned utility partners, and all utility partners, but I know EWEB in particular, to understand their current processes for income verification on similar programs. Yeah.
Someone else put in census tract and self-declaration as well. And then we have 2 hands up. We'll start with Ahmed. Okay, you're off mute.
Am I off mute? Sorry, I can't tell. My screen's a little funny.
Hi. So first, I'll just put our organization, National Partnership for New Americans, which is a coalition of immigrant advocates and immigrant advocacy organizations, both in Oregon and around the country, are strongly in support of self-attestation, if it's possible, worked with DOE to get that into the guidelines. But I'd say that in terms of qualified, just like qualification systems, I know that most of the programs, LIHEAP, weatherization systems, etc., are classified as federal public benefits, and many of the Oregon state programs require a Social Security number as part of for folks to enroll in them. And I just note that these rebates are explicitly stated by DOE as not federal public benefits, and so should be made by states accessible to folks who are non-citizens, a wide category of non-citizens who may not have Social Security numbers, other documentation. So I'm just curious if there are any programs that you're looking for qualified verification in Oregon that would fit that criteria.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. And I'll just say that that's the exact type of discussion we want to have in this. And that's something that, frankly, we'd not thought a ton about to this point, but it's something that we're very interested in, and is very much something we'll pursue. I'll say I don't think we had, in our limited understanding what the workflow might look like right now, I do not think a Social Security number was going to be required, and certainly understand that can be a barrier, or that is a barrier to folks, and so it's something we would like to avoid. yeah, I think maybe we'll be in touch separately as well to have a more one-on-one discussion about that. But thank you for flagging that issue for us.
Definitely a lot of plus ones and comments in support of self-declaration, including sharing that it's, I think, an example that's happening with heat pumps where the tenants might have the items on the list that they can use to show income verification, but then the owner doesn't want to attest to that, and then the tenants are contacting the contractors directly, so it's kind of creating kind of a strange dynamic there, sounds like. And I think the other two comments in the chat right now are not, I'll bring them back at the right time. And then we have two with the hands up. We'll start with David and then we'll get to you, Neil. Go ahead, David.
I have two comments. One is on the use of the self-attestation form in state programs. For the community heat pump deployment program, in our application that is in process of being approved, for being an administrator there, we did say that we were going to use self-attestation for determining, in that case, yet another level, 120% of AMI. And that was approved by the state. So the determination of whether or not the state can use self-attestation for determining eligibility to use state funds, there's at least that example where it was determined that it was okay to use that to pay for heat pumps. And it's a very similar set of measures that program pays for. So, and then separately, I just wanted to ask if the state was thinking about using the income eligibility tool that U.S. Department of Energy has spent the better part of the last year creating. It's basically software as a service that whatever IT system the state puts together to manage applications, it would flow through the federal tool that they developed in combination with the IRS to actually do income verification and then send back, a yes or no answer to you all. And I don't know all the details. It's been described in the guidance and stuff, but the idea is to make it so people don't have to permanently hold that PII data on households, but be able to get a very quick response on eligibility from a outside source. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the short answer on that is yes, we're aware of the tool that USDOE is working on and have had conversations with them about that and are very interested in using that.
All right, Neil, and then we'll go to Prerna. Neil, you're up.
Thanks. I kind of wanted to bring up 2 points from experience with DEQ or with the charge ahead rebate that I've had hands-on experience with, and learning lessons from there. One is that both outreach and barriers are very different when we have low and moderate income incentives. It's a different set of barriers and outreach techniques that are needed for low income households and moderate income. So you qualify for another program, and so you automatically qualify for this is really great in dropping some of those barriers for low income households, but there's a large number of that population that haven't enrolled in one of those other programs, but might still be eligible here. So with that being said, a lot of moderate income households who might be able to take advantage of these kind of live in a different paradigm, haven't experienced income qualification before, have a different set of barriers. And then one other thing from the development of that program that came up is spending some time ahead of time to consider the implications of how you're doing household size with rentals, because it's also a different game. So that program started by saying all members living under one roof essentially would need to do combined income verification. And I don't know if you've thought about that, but just wanted to make sure this program doesn't disincentivize cohabitation households that aren't sharing finances but are sharing it on rent, and how that might be addressed. I haven't seen great examples, recognizing that this is a little bit different than a vehicle incentive, because that's a benefit going to one person or one, benefit. This is going to the household. So just wanting to make sure that we don't end up in the same tricky spot that we got before, where a household looks like it's a very high income household, but it's because there's 6 moderate income workers living in the same roof.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that, Will?
Really appreciate that feedback, and I think those are important considerations.
All right, I'm gonna go to Prerna, and then I'll go through the chat. Oh, actually, Clay just snuck in there. Can we get Prerna? Yeah, there we go. Prerna, then
Can you hear
Clay.
me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to weigh in. I think income verification is a very important topic as part of here. Overall, I think the experience that the public has and that consumers have with income verification is going to be really important. And so we urge you all to consider ways to simplify the process. And so, self-attestation, as has been said, would be a key way to do that. Also, categorical eligibility to reach certain covered households is really important. The opportunity to tap into participants of SNAP, LIHEAP, weatherization, Medicaid for automatic pre-qualification and targeted education is really important as well. And, overall, we also think that states should deploy the efficiency and electrification rebates for the eligible income levels under the law simultaneously. We think that that would really drive momentum behind the rebate programs and result in education, awareness building, and greater attention. So thank you for the opportunity again to be able to weigh in.
Thank you so much, Julie. Appreciate that. Quickly, like I said, I'll go here through the chat, and then we'll get to Clay in just a second. And I see a couple questions that we'll get back to when we're kind of done with this conversation on income verification. This is actually from Clay, so maybe when we get to Clay, we'll ask, he can say that. Ahmed came back in to remind us that a lot of the federal programs that would allow for qualified verification require social security numbers, which would exclude non-citizens, whereas the rebates cannot exclude non-citizens. Another thought about keeping documentation requirements flexible. How about when there's not a straightforward verification document, self-attestation plus some documentation options could back it up. The US DOE income verification tool sounds like it'd be hard for landlords to get tenants to use. And someone else is chiming in to say he just helped someone apply for health insurance. Income verification wasn't that hard, but they did have to supply a social security number and estimated income. That's a self-attestation kind of model, I think. And then there's also the eligibility programs that are allowable. There's a link in the chat. And then with that, we'll go ahead to Clay.
Can I jump in on one of those?
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
So the US DOE system is mostly a back-end tool that we would use to interface with the US Department of Energy's database for checking these things. It would not be on the tenant to go into that system.
Great. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Clay. Now you're up.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, Will. So one thing I think maybe a dose of reality is there's significant complexity in this question that Odo's gonna need to tackle, and the outcome will probably still be a challenge to fully optimize into smooth and not burdensome. So the other piece of this is, how do you keep people excited to hang in there for the process? Whatever it ends up being. Hopefully it's incredibly smooth and painless. And if it isn't incredibly smooth and painless, despite best efforts, how do we keep these folks engaged and excited to trudge through whatever ends up having to be the reality of the verification process? That's something to consider.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that feedback, and good to hear from you.
Thanks, Clay. All right. Well, there's nothing new in the chat and no hands up. So, here comes Mark. Hi, Mark. Mark, you're on mute, off mute.
Question of how to keep folks engaged. And I think it points to another question of when to do income verification. So if the income verification is the very first thing that a customer experiences, you will lose people before you really even have an opportunity to connect with them, understand how to reach them. And so there are benefits and drawbacks to the different options laid out by the federal government and that people have introduced here. Having the income verification not be the first step creates some opportunity to create a connection with a customer and support them through whatever the process may be.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I'll just make maybe a plug there for the one-stop shop that we also talk a lot about, a bit out of the scope of this discussion, but another component as we roll out these rebate programs is thinking about developing a single resource for consumers in the state interested in efficiency programs. And that's kind of a subsequent program. And maybe I shouldn't have brought that up and now piqued people's interest, but please follow up if you're interested in hearing more about that.
All right. So I'm going to ask if we can go back to the slide that has the chart on the limits for each type of appliance or project. Thank you. And then we'll catch back up with our plan in a second. So while we're on here, I have lost it, but somebody said something about electric resistance heat and whether or not we could help people transition off of electric resistance heat with this program. And so even though I've lost the question, do you get the basic idea?
Yep, and I thanks for bringing that up because I did see that question and wanted to respond. Yes, folks with electric resistance heat are eligible for these types of upgrades.
Yeah, it's so inefficient and costly. So I'm really glad to hear that. And then, oh, there it is. I finally found it. It's from eWeb. I found it. Yes, they would be able to take advantage. Then we also had a question in the chat, and then David wanted us to go back. So David, put your hand up because I'm back here for you. And then I'll call on you in 1 second. So the other question that came in was about, I have to find this one again, sorry. Oh goodness, where did you go? Okay, this was from DEQ. And just I think DEQ, or else Tori is just sharing that Oregon DEQ has experience with heat pump installations through the change out programs. And it does seem like often the total costs are frequently higher than $8K, which we know too. We definitely need to look out for avenues for braided funding. And for those who need electric panel upgrades or other interventions prior to installation, and that she imagines this will impact low income program participants. So I just wanted to bring that up here where we're looking at that 8K. And I mean, you could go ahead. Do you want to talk a little? I know we're going to talk about putting incentives together in a minute, so we can hear more about that in a minute, but just wanted to acknowledge that. And then David, you are off mute.
Yes, thank you. And this is the chart that I was interested in going back to because I seem to remember from the guidance that these are the maximum levels set in statute, right? But if the state wanted to modify these, the state could modify these, which there might be programmatic reasons for doing that. Like the $4,000 for the electric load service center, maybe through discussion with contractors, maybe that one should be a little less to save money for some of the other things that get done. Because if it is 4,000, then the cost of doing an electric load service center is probably going to be 4,000 for somebody who's income qualified, right? Just wanted not to add more work, Will, on all the things that you're working on, but in terms of, I know that it is a flexibility for the state. You can't adjust these up, But if you wanted to adjust any one particular one down or more because you thought that the prices in our marketplace would align with that, there is the possibility to do that, which could leave more money on the table for other items.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for flagging that, David. And that is something we are aware of. And I think a piece of our decision making will be doing that statewide market research to understand if all of these are appropriate. I'll also note that our hope would be that maybe optimistic, but that the rebate amount doesn't always go to, that we're not always at the maximum amount of the rebate, and that if it is below $4,000, we will be below $4,000 with the rebate as well. But I appreciate you flagging that, and that's definitely an option that we have as a state as we're designing the program.
This conversation has got 2 hands up, so we'll go to them in a second, and then we'll get back on track after those 2. And then I'm going to ask one quick question, I think, from the chat, which is that are there technology efficiency minimums for the qualified products?
Yeah, so there are qualified products that I believe that meet a certain minimum, and then as a state we have the option to potentially make a stricter minimum for that. So that's another program design decision. Right now the USDOE references the Energy Star website in their frequently asked questions page for available technologies for the rebate program, but the final decision on specific eligibility or appliance standards will be part of our decision at the state level.
And then we'll go to Prerna and Rachel, and then we'll get back on track, because I really just decided to take us off track without asking anyone first. So, but such good information. So glad to have it. But Prerna, you're up.
Thanks again, Christy. Really appreciate it. I think we believe at Samsung that consumers would benefit from having the choice of picking which of the allowed technologies they would like to meet the 14,000 cap for here. The law, we think, is clear on what a qualified electrification project is, and it includes any of the 8 categories in HERA. And really, I think it's critical that state programs be consistent and comprehensive on the eligible categories so that retailers and manufacturers can effectively educate consumers on the home rebate program. So I really wanted to communicate this point while we were on this slide. So apologies for having to jump in here again, but thank you so much.
No, it's great. No, I welcome it. I just feel bad for Will that I went off agenda so bad. And then Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm just curious, I hadn't really thought about this, and I wanted to confirm one thing and then ask a question. Is the HERE program, the funding that's available for this spread out over a certain time period? Is it 5 years or something like that? What's that?
Yeah, it's 8 years that the funding is available for.
Okay, gotcha. So I guess on that, so understanding it's an 8-year time period, these the maximums and they're going to remain the maximums for the whole 8-year period. So is there any adjustment in here for annual inflation or cost increases in the market that we might see between now and whatever 8 years from now is? Because that these will suddenly become not as usable, right? As each year progresses, they will not meet up with the actual costs of products and equipment.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. My understanding is that would probably be an option for USDOE, or that would probably require USDOE to revise the program guidelines at the federal level. And I am not aware of that being mentioned in the guidelines currently, but that is a very good question and something we can bring up with them specifically.
Thank you.
Right. So as we get back to the slide we were getting ready to move on to, I'll bring up a couple of things that came up in the chat. In the meantime, we did have a last piece on income verification saying to keep it out of contractor or landlord's hands, use a third party for verification, as a comment from my very own contractor and also a PSEF staffer. And then another contractor agreed. And then someone else just said getting an accurate income number will be important for those folks that are near the kind of qualifying, not deadline, but limit. And then we have, I'm going to go ahead and ask this question to everybody, and then I'll get into a couple of other, oh gosh, a lot just happened in the chat in the last like minute. So let's do this. We got some questions about like how we plan on expending the funds. So would it be okay to talk about that for a second, Will?
Yeah, I saw those questions on if this is going to all be available up front or
Yeah,
spaced
it's like
out
how
over
will we
time.
ration them? How do we kind of, is it first come, first served? Do you expect them to last more than a year? Even if there is 8 years, could it go faster?
Yeah, so I'll say in response to I think Jeremy's question about the different kind of challenges that might be involved with that, I think that that's a program design decision, is how whether or not we want to reserve specific amounts year over year. And so that's something we're very open to feedback on. I will say the way the U.S. Department of Energy is delivering this funding to states, there are separate tranches of funding that are released once a certain previous requirement is met. So for example, I believe one of them, if you've met 20% of low income targets, you get the subsequent amount of funding. And that really isn't particularly relevant for this discussion, other than the U.S. Department of Energy does space it out, but it's not a year by year equal split of the total funding. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. So kind of related to this, there was a flag that in general, we might consider offering a larger number of smaller dollar incentives in order to provide a more stable program. And that in thinking about the end of the program, like if you slowly lower the incentives over time, it might help with the sort of cliff kind of effect of the rebate just ending and that being harmful to contractors. So just raising that idea. And then we have someone saying Energy certified products display differ wildly in actual efficiency. So some thoughts there. Ahmed's pointing out that the dollar amounts are written into statute, so it would require an act of Congress to change that. And then Jennifer, hi Jennifer, wanting to note that standards should align with BPA to allow for braiding in COU territory, which is definitely something we're tracking and working to figure out. And then we have just a comment. Oh, maybe this is, okay. Someone's moved on to the slide. Yay, such a great moment. So the question you've all already read here allows for rebates on a variety of appliances, including electric heat pump water heaters, electric stoves, heat pump clothes dryers, weatherization measures, and electric wiring and breakers. Which of these technologies may be most beneficial to low-income communities? And Nancy, thank you, has said she thinks health induction would be really helpful to low-income communities, and from a cost perspective, heat pump HVAC, which HVAC is 55% of household energy use. And then their second question here is appliance replacement often occurs in emergency situations, like when a furnace stops working in the winter and must be replaced. How can HERE equip contractors to deliver efficient electric appliances in these situations? So open for any thoughts on these two questions in the chat or with your hand up. Zach thinks heat pump hot water heaters also, which is half of heating energy.
Yeah, and maybe I'll also note, so you may recognize this question from last week if you attended, and there was good conversation at that point. I think heat pump hot water heaters or heat pump water heaters were brought up a lot as a technology that could have benefits, particularly when we talk about bill impacts. So thank you.
And induction stoves for health got a +1 from Doug. And then we can go to Prerna with their hand up. You're off mute.
Thanks again, Christy. Appreciate being able to weigh in again. I think as I mentioned earlier, for reasons I stated, we think all 8 categories should be given rebates. Did really want to highlight induction cooking products, how fast an induction cooking product can boil water twice as fast. It's just outstanding. Putting less stress on the home HVAC system of an induction cooking product is another critical aspect. Instant temperature control, ease of cleaning, improved efficiency compared to non-induction are among some of the many benefits. And Energy Star recently developed an electric cooking product specification, and since here requires Energy Star, if applicable, only Energy Star electric cooking product should receive the rebates in our view. And so just wanted to weigh in with that as well. Thank you again.
Great, thank you so much. Just somebody did, by the way, point out that they thought induction could require some education for folks that get that installed. And another thought in the chat, the primary goal is to reduce carbon emissions. The program should prioritize the most cost-effective opportunities in terms of energy savings per measure. And then with that, we'll go to John Karasaki, who had his hand up first, and then Clay. Sean, you're off mute.
I was answering the second question about
Great.
emergency replacement. And I brought this up before when we were talking about T-pumps for rental properties, but much like some jurisdictions in the states, so some municipalities or cities have a minor label program where contractors go in, they buy into that program. They have trust, they're effectively trusted installers. That's something to think about for emergency situations. You could have a group of contractors that have met or far exceeded your rigorous standards of being one of your providers. And if they have a situation, the most noticeable of like a water heater goes out on a Saturday kind of thing. And that can't wait a couple of weeks for approvals and all those type of things. That needs to get done right away. But if you have a trusted group of contractors that you've trained and have gone through the kind of the rigor of inspection of your projects, and you just basically trust them to make the right decision, then that's something to think about developing under all the programs kind of throughout that are going to be administered with the state.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that feedback.
Great. And then Clay?
Thanks. Consumers want things that support their lifestyles. Electric stoves, are going to be maybe the feeder measure to get people wanting to interact with the rest of these measures that are available, or even made aware of the other measures. For emergency replacements, the first thing that we all do is jump online. Oh my gosh, it's not working anymore. What do I do? Who has it? So having a stellar consumer-based online presence to capture these folks when they're at the moment they're in market, so this deal becomes apparent to them.
Thanks.
Thanks, Clay. And then a couple of other comments in the chat. One is emergency replacement situations are likely to be problematic if panel work is needed for electrification. So that's one piece. And then if you want to promote emergency replacements, you need to make the application process fast and simple. And Larry's raising the point that he's got some numbers. Well, we've got numbers too on how many households we think can be served. So I think Larry's done some math here maybe. Oregon has a 56.7 million for here. We do an average of 7,000 per rebate. That's only 7,100 homes. Do you want to comment on that? I know we've also thought about this too.
Yeah, I would love to comment on that. Yeah, thank you for bringing up that point, Larry. And I would say that your math checks out and is in line with some of the pretty basic modeling we've done. I think, yeah, the reality of this program is that it's a drop in the bucket of what we will ultimately need to do to deliver on the goals we have as a state. It's going to be a really important drop in the bucket, and it's going to be very meaningful, and it's going to impact a lot of households. But you're absolutely right that it's not going to get everyone in Oregon energy efficient technologies. And so I'll add that the way we're thinking about that is things we've talked about as far as how do we braid funds and maximize the value of all the different programs that are currently there in the state. And then two, how do we spur lasting market transformation change that's going to build a workforce, build a contractor base, and make people aware that these types of programs are available going forward. And that's 100% something we're thinking of and aware of. And so I appreciate the bit of a reality check on the discussion here. So thank you.
Yep. David has his hand up. That last question was a really good one and one I want to talk about, and I don't think we have a slide for it. And then David has his hand up. So we'll grab David and then see if there's anybody else that wanted to comment on the question in front of us before we move on. So go ahead, David.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah, maybe I was going to say something that's similar to what you were going to say, but about market transformation, you know, the the guidelines require that the state turn in a market transformation plan that really kind of addresses these issues. Like, how is this program, which will like a drop in the bucket, or maybe like a scoop in the bucket, you know, maybe more than a drop, but like, how does it set up for a long-term change? So how is this like working with the way buildings get or homes get described, documented, and marketed in the real estate industry, documented for the appraisal industry and the banking industry? How does it integrate with the utility programs? The state has to actually write that whole plan. And if I remember right, 25% of all these funds are withheld from the state until you submit the market transformation plan to DOE. So everybody has an impetus to participate in getting this market transformation plan like written up, and participation in that I'm sure will be a next phase that you're going to explain to us, Christy, when all that kicks off. But the more people that can be thinking about that, it's a make a plan that makes sense for all the different stakeholders. I think the higher likelihood of chance that we actually will see market transformation and actually seeing this activity taking place without the federal money involved, because it has become the thing to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. We've got a couple of other hands up. We'll go to those, back to the chat, and then maybe move on to the next slide after that. Bethany, you are off mute. Thanks, Abby.
Phone, and I just got back to video, so thanks. Will, I appreciate the comments and the reality check around the number of households, and I'm wondering if you all are thinking about what your process is going to be to kind of warn folks that the funds are nearly spent down, because it really does seem like in all likelihood the demand is going to far outpace supply, as it did in Maine recently. And there's, I think I will speak personally, and lots of folks I know, people who are just waiting with bated breath for the programs to be in place. But then there's obviously the delay of lining up the contract and the supply issue, especially with heat pumps. So curious about your thoughts around how to give some warning of when the funds are running low and how we deal with that when it gets toward the end, and then how to work with the state and the feds to provide some more funding. Thanks.
Thanks, Bethany. One thing I'll just mention really quickly, just because state programs are the state heat pump programs I have a strong relationship with. We are getting ready to open in most parts of the state, there will be a regional administrator for our community heat pump deployment program. And that is a $10 million fund that should be opening, I think just opened in South Central Oregon, and we'll be getting ready to open up in Central Oregon and around the Willamette Valley, as well as kind of the North Central region of the state. And then we're working to get regional administrators in other parts of the state still. But that program will hopefully provide like a little kickstart on some of that demand, I'm hoping, for folks specifically that want heat pumps. So just know that's just one thing I want to kind of add into that conversation. It's a little bit less what's going to come at the end, but a little bit more like, could we try to get at some of those projects earlier? And then Will, if you have any thoughts on that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I'll start by saying thank you for flagging that issue and appreciate that feedback. I think that's a very important part of the process, is us appropriately messaging to interested folks the how much is available and what type of funding is available. And I know that we have, for most, I believe for all the programs we run, we have processes in place around reporting out available funding that's remaining, what funding's already been reserved or accessed. And so I would anticipate we will have something like that with this program as well. I'll also say, I think a big part of it is around the marketing and outreach and making sure that we're helping people connect with the programs that are right for them. And so this program here and homes as well are not necessarily going to be right for everyone, but someone had made a point earlier about kind of getting people into a program and making that point of contact. And I think that's going to be a really valuable thing to do, is to make sure that, we're not just turning people away from here. We're letting them know what other options are available to them if we're in a position where the funding has been exhausted for this program. I think that gets back to the point of kind of building the infrastructure for efficiency programs across our state, which we have a lot of right now, and we have a lot of great work being done, but continuing to make sure that everything's working together.
Yeah. So Mark, I'm gonna get to you in 1 second. There's just like a super relevant comment here that I wanted to bring back before I lose sight of it. That's sort of like, what do we do about the demand side? And one thing we've kind of thought a lot about here at the agency is how we can help people understand that the tax credits might be the best venue for them. It's not like for sure that this is what the feds were thinking, but it appears to us as though the tax credits are sort of designed to get at the folks who are not, particularly with here, not low to moderate income. And the moderate income threshold is pretty high in this program too, for what it's worth. And so, I think that's another thing, is like helping people understand how the tax credits work, and that could be a perfectly good amount for them. I think some people want to try to get both together. And that's, I believe, allowed, but I think it's like, maybe not the sort of spirit of it, I guess. So anyway, but the tax credits are projected to be a larger federal expenditure than these rebate programs, and folks should definitely use them and learn about them. And that can also help with the demand, I think, for some people. Okay, so Mark, now to you.
Thank you. On the emergency replacement, but also I think relevant to demand and market transformation, engaging manufacturers, distributors, and retailers to assure product availability all throughout the state will really help. I mean, there's other issues that people have noted, but if something isn't available in a short time frame, you've lost that window on the emergency replacement. It's also a good way to measure market transformation, share of a product on a retail floor space or through distributors' sales. The more of the supply chain that we can occupy with the beneficial technologies, the better set up you are for a longer lasting impact. So it's something that perhaps, I think a lot of the folks on this call and stakeholders in their own way could use their relationships, even as a consumer, to help get more product available to more people.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark. We had a question from Rachel regarding emergency situations. Here's is not retroactive, but could there be some sort of grace period where you can request the rebate after an install is complete, as opposed to applying before the install in the case of an emergency replacement?
Yeah, appreciate that question. So I guess when we've been referring to not retroactive up to this point, we're generally meaning before the program guidelines have been released. So that's to say that if you install something in 2023, it's not going to be eligible for this program because the program hasn't been launched yet. I think there might be workflows in which that could occur after the product has been installed, as long as the correct information is taken down and submitted and verified. So I think appreciate that question and that providing that clarification. I would say that's going to be a program design and sort of decision as we think about the specific ways that funds will be delivered and the contractors or homeowners will work together.
Great. And then Brad Reed, hi Brad. He is mentioning that there's a California pilot program related to emergency replacement where contractors are paid a small grant to install temporary equipment same day. and then do the work to prepare the home or building for a heat pump. So that's something we could look at, and he included a link, so helpful. There's a link to information on the tax credits for folks to learn more about. And then we have a couple of kind of general questions. Do you feel like tackling those now or later? Well,
Happy to do them now. Do my
okay.
best.
How will this interact with DEQ's Community Climate Investment Program? And if we're going to have a slide where you think we can talk about that, you can do that too.
Yeah, maybe I'll table that for the slide. We have a specific slide coming up about how we might braid funds together. Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
I guess I'll just say we work closely with our partner agencies and we'll very much be engaged with DEQ.
Yeah. And then since this is an instant rebate, will it be the contractor's responsibility to offer the rebate and then file the appropriate forms to be reimbursed, or will this be administered directly from the state to the homeowner?
So we'll also have a slide that's covering kind of that question. So maybe I'll table that for that.
Great. Sorry, I thought the one after I asked the first one I knew, but this one. Okay, we'll move on. To the next slide, which I know there's a delay, so I know Steph's probably trying to make it happen. So here's the CCI slide. How can the HERE program integrate with existing low-income energy efficiency programs? And what programs are well suited for being braided with the HERE funding? So if you want to go ahead and tackle CCIs, go for it. I'll give people time to raise their hand or make some comments.
Yeah, and I'll just note that I know people have given some feedback on this question thus far, and we appreciate that. And we'll take all the feedback from the whole meeting into account as we start to think more critically about this.
And Erin, I see your comment, and I'll bring that up when we have the next conversation. And Jennifer's flagging the BPA programs are well suited to be braided with HERE funding. Okay, we don't have any hands up and we're not getting a lot of comments on this one, but we'll keep an eye on them. Oh, ETO savings within reach. The COU weatherization programs and show come up from Jeremy. Clay, do you have some thoughts on how to integrate or what programs are well suited for being braided with HERE funding? We'll get you off mute. There you go.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not up to speed on your other programs. However, you know, with this customer flow, making it very simple for folks to have an aha moment of, oh my gosh, there's stacked rebates, an IRA rebate or HERE rebate in some other Oregon or you know, statewide or county program, and being able to see all that, you know, right in front of their eyes on exactly the product that, you know, they need to replace.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Thanks, Clay. And Jason, hi Jason, from eWeb brings up that there's also self-funded COU programs that we want to make sure we can braid with or how to look at. And David, you are off. David has a hand up and now is off mute.
Yep, thank you. And so this, I would say, in addition to BPA and the self-funded COU ones, you know, Energy Trust does have savings within reach, and then also its community partner programs, and both of those have higher levels for lower income, pretty much up to middle income households. So between those and the public utilities, that covers, you know, most of the state. I guess maybe the thing to point out is what's really it can't work with is the WAP program, right? Like it explicitly can't be stacked with the federal dollars coming through the weatherization program. And maybe for clarity, is it any federal dollar that it can't be stacked with, or is it just those weatherization federal dollars it can't be stacked with? Do we know the answer to that?
I might see if Emily has more clarity. So my understanding is there are specifics around what types of federal programs can be combined and cannot be combined. And I'm not sure I have further specifics on that. My understanding of the WAP program is that it couldn't supplant the existing WAP program, but that the same household could potentially receive funding for separate programs or for separate measures or separate projects from both programs. And I think that's part of what we're thinking about when we think about braiding too. So not just using multiple funds on a single project, but thinking about maybe the weatherization assistance program is able to deliver weatherization, and maybe here is able to deliver then a heat pump or another technology that is separate from that. So separate use of funds, but still benefiting the same household.
Emily's kind of seconding your notion in the chat. Okay, we can go to Clay and then Mark, and then maybe I'll soon go back to the things in the chat when we go to the next slide, but I'm seeing you folks. Clay, you're off.
Will, your clarification on braiding is really intriguing because, you know, you have this person engaging with you on the program. There's potential next best actions and how those are surfaced to that consumer. You know, there's a significant amount of opportunity to do that and dial that in over time in the customer experience.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Clay. And then we can go to Mark.
Hi again, everyone. I'm with Energy Trust of Oregon. Thank you for the comments there on our programs, and we're very much committed to making adjustments and working together with Stephanie and Will and all of Odo. And the programs that I wanted to highlight are actually ones where I would solicit input from the folks here, and these are housing repair programs. I think this is important for any energy program, especially serving low and moderate incomes, that there's other issues with the home or the building that may need to be addressed either to enable the energy efficiency requirements or maybe very pressing issues. So that's, I think, an area where it'd be nice to think creatively about what other resources are available, and some of those move through municipalities. And do some creative thinking about how we can use this opportunity to really improve, from a resiliency perspective, the housing stock in Oregon.
Great. All right. Okay. I don't see any hands up. Nothing new pertaining to this question in the chat. So we can maybe move on to the next slide. Right. So this is actually a proposed process from USDOE that following income verification, a coupon would be generated to purchase equipment, and the coupon will be used along with the purchase receipt or invoice to claim the rebate amount. Depending on the scenario, this redemption could be done by the installer, the vendor, or the homeowner. Do you have thoughts on this potential workflow? And as we all marinate on that question for a second, I want to kind of go back. Is this where you thought we could talk about the instant rebate piece? That question, do you want to be reminded of it? It was, would this be administered directly by the state to the homeowner? I think what we're saying here is that's an option we need to decide. So we want to hear from you what you'd prefer. Yeah.
Correct. So I was just going to say that I think this is the right place to address that question. So that could, there's multiple iterations, there's multiple ways that this could work. And so we've sort of laid out a rough process flow that USDOE has kind of outlined on the screen here. I'll say don't feel too connected to this particular workflow or process. We are very much here to hear feedback on what will work and what you all think is a good option. So if you see this on your screen and this is something that you think might not be a good idea, we would like to hear that. We're not proposing this in any way, but it's just guidance that USDOE has given us to help states start thinking through how this might work.
Great. I'm going to grab a comment related that was a little about 9 minutes ago in the chat, and then we'll go to Daniel with the hand up. Aaron's saying that he would recommend that we utilize a, oh my gosh, it just went away. That we utilize a midstream rebate company to do pre-qualification and handle the rebate dollars to the dealer. And he says a dealer cannot afford to be out 20 to 30K for 6 to 8 weeks to get paid by the states. And he says that's what Washington's going to do. And then we can go to Daniel. You're off mute.
He said, whatever we can do to avoid the contractor from having to front these funds is, I think, the most crucial. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Great, thanks. And then Zach suggests we add CBOs to this list because they can aggregate projects. Coupon sounds great for contractors, but possibly tough for elderly customers, non-English speakers, and tenants. I'm curious what others think. Clay has his hand up. Clay, you're good to go?
I certainly want to go down the road of, Energy's core competency, which is statewide marketplaces, to play a massive role in this, answering this question and bringing it to activation. I don't want to turn it into a sales pitch, so.
Okay. There's a coalition that worked to pass the Resilient Efficient Buildings package this legislative session, which essentially directed the agency to apply for these funds. And Brad Reed, who's the lead for that coalition, strongly supports making the rebates payable to contractors or community-based organizations because homeowners won't have the money to fund a project and be paid back later. And then Neil will bring you off mute. And you're up. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah, one question that I have is kind of related to one of the previous scenarios, is just with the program design, how long the coupon would be good for. I haven't really thought through all of the different scenarios that folks might be applying for and how long they might need that to be eligible. But I do think in a limited funds environment, that clarity is really helpful in the customer journey. But just thinking about that, in that there will be more people that apply and qualify than will be eligible, then we'll actually use the funds. So we might tie up a lot of funds holding it up that way, but these are just kind of all thoughts running around in my head. And then one other thought is that, maybe if somebody qualifies, there's funds held for a certain period of time and then a re-application process rather than the full re-verification, just so then we can kind of accomplish both goals. But I don't know if I've necessarily seen that in other program designs, but that might kind of accomplish both goals.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Those are really helpful thoughts.
So in the chat, James is noting that there's some experiences happening with revolving funds where contractors in good standing could be paid almost immediately and the revolving fund reimbursed from the program funds. So that's something else thrown into the mix. And we'll see if we get any other comments or hands raised. You do have another one. It's Clay talking about leveraging a statewide online marketplace. You could go through whatever online verification necessary to get the coupon. go back to the online marketplace to make the purchase, or choose the nearest retailer to go to. That's how that model could work. And then the flip side of a shorter expiration on a coupon is that quite a bit of work already has a 4 to 6 month lead time, and this might get worse with more federal money available.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you.
Right. Well, we'll still be monitoring the chat and grabbing it for posterity and reviewing it later. So if anyone has any other thoughts on this model and what you think might work best, feel free to throw it in the chat. We're also going to share toward the end of the meeting a way that you can kind of go see these questions again and respond in like a written form at your own pace, or maybe run it by coworkers, or however you'd like to go about filling it out when you'd have more time versus just in the moment like right now. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So USDOE requires the Oregon Department of Energy to submit a consumer protection plan as part of its application. This must include a system for collecting and responding to consumer feedback, resolution procedures, data review process, on-site inspection strategy, a qualified contractor list, and installation standards. What are your suggestions for the development of a strong consumer protection plan? Clay, you're off mute.
Thanks. Trying not to sound like a broken record, however, mitigating any issues around consumer protection with some, really thoughtful, attractive, state channels to really, for folks to just have a quick aha moment of, is what that person said for real? Let me go to the state channel where I can see what reality is with this program and make a determination before I get hoodwinked.
Okay, thanks, Clay. And Rhonda says, oh, this is so hard to hear. The Odo rental program to date has been an administrative nightmare. Really sorry to hear that. Would be nice if we could do what we do best by installing measures and taking care of customers with a third party managing consumer protection and administration. So duly noted. Right. Does Odo have a language access plan for these rebate programs and or the existing state heat pump program, etc.? I know we have information in Spanish for the state heat pump programs. A language access plan sounds like probably something more than that. Will, do you know if we already have a language access plan or if that's something we plan to develop?
So for the existing state programs, I'm not sure. I haven't worked directly on those.
Yeah, we did hire one of our program staff. We required them to be bilingual, so we have a bilingual staffer. So I'll just throw that in there in addition to the fact that we have the materials available in Spanish. So that person deals with a lot of the contractors that aren't native English speakers and want to ask questions and stuff in Spanish.
Yeah, and then I'll just add, I would imagine a similar approach for these federal rebate programs as they come out, but also recognize that Spanish is not the only language other than English, and so we'll certainly want to think about other strategies to reach all consumers.
And then Jeremy's noting that a qualified contractor list should require more than the basic CCV insurance qualifications. Customers tend to think of a qualified list as the same as an endorsement, and Odo doesn't want to be seen as endorsing poor work, of which there will be plenty, he prognosticates. Mendy has a question, and then I'll get to the chat, or the hands. His question, or I'm sorry, their question is the consumer protection like beforehand or after installation and ensuring that equipment functions well for the life of the unit?
I'd say it's all of that. So it's beforehand, it's during, and making sure it's installed correctly. And then it's also, I guess, when we talk about the life of the unit, that's probably more so an education piece on part of the contractor or someone else to make sure that the owner knows how to use that equipment properly. So I would say that's all part of what we'll need to develop a plan for.
Okay. And then can we get Ahmed on the line?
Yeah, just to speak to a couple of points in language access and to like say where that's coming from. So one of the reasons we in Immigrant Rights Coalition have been engaged in the deployment of these rebate programs, and just to clarify, like I'm based in Oregon, but we're engaging with it with members around the country, is that our members, some of them have been involved in running navigator programs to implement similar state programs, implement LIHEAP, et cetera, to their members, and found that there's just like a really significant barrier to especially limited English proficiency folks accessing these rebates, but also a high concentration of limited English proficiency among some of the most energy burdened households in these target states. So that we see as like a key strategy. So just say a language access plan, like obviously our members in Oregon are beyond just Spanish speakers. You know, Apano is one of our members working the Asian Pacific American Network in the state. So there's a number that usually involves like identifying the top usually 5 or by voting population languages in the state, kind of trying to map them onto where are your target populations for energy burden, et cetera, and then like deploying stuff in language based on kind of like a mapping at that level. That's the best practice. We can talk more about, we can follow up more one-on-one on that. And then I just say on the contractor side of qualified contractor lists, our members in other parts of the country that have implemented, for example, like the TVA Uplift program, one of the major costs and the biggest challenge was a lack of qualified contractors with appropriate language skills. And we're seeing that all over the country as a key barrier in immigrant communities and limited English language proficiency communities. So folks are having to provide translation at like every single contractor appointment to do navigation work to get, those benefits to those households. So including language skills on your list of contractors, I think is really important. I think it's a thing that we assume that a lot of these countries should have language skills, and just we've noticed it's a thing that our members have asked for.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we totally agree. Will's chatting me that we want to get together with you maybe desperately. So we'll find you and get together and talk more about that. I also just want to flag, we know that there's a lot of folks that do this type of contracting work that speak Russian, for example. So we definitely know it's not just Spanish, but that's just what we have going. I know for a fact from the heat pump program. So I was just kind of speaking off the cuff there about what I know, but I really appreciate that. And we absolutely should follow up and have a longer conversation and make sure we're ready for that dynamic to play out here in Oregon. Will, do you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, thank you for bringing that perspective, and would love to have a more in-depth conversation around those challenges.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, we also, this is just like how this goes too. We do ask for languages spoken for our contractor lists. We got the idea actually from a meeting with Latino Network a few years ago. And so we started adding it for our solar rebate. And so I think we also have it for our, as far as I know, we have it for heat pumps too. And it is interesting, like how one thing is like how limited that is. Like sometimes there's just no, there's very few in our solar contractor list folks that speak different languages. And then we've also had the issue of we'll find out that there's somebody who speaks Spanish there or something, or Tagalog, for example. And then later it'll turn out that staff member has left. So it is sort of like an interesting, just an interesting dynamic. So when we do talk, maybe we could think of like, how do we deal with that kind of thing? Okay, so we have a lot of activity in the chat. I'm going to have Clay come off and then we'll deal with the chat. Clay, you're up.
Thanks. Touching on Ahmed's significant point about language, on the digital channel side, it can become incredibly challenging to do that multi-language. One thing we've seen work is at least having landing page options in various languages to at least start the the experience in the language familiar with that person. Same thing with marketing, especially email marketing, is to be able to do that in multiple languages as a kind of at least finding like an economical initial path forward. The other side of that is making people aware that they can leverage Google Translate to at least get some modicum of translation that's beneficial for them to stay engaged through deeper digital channels that become more difficult to fully translate economically.
All right, thanks, Clay. And then to the chat. Zach raised that eWeb has a list of contractors that have previously received incentives and passed subsequent inspections as a kind of quality control check there. Rachel, I think, is coming back on the coupon. Agree that there needs to be some ability to guarantee the coupon for a longer period, especially for projects that need to tackle larger electrical upgrades to support new equipment and or code upgrades that require going through building permit process, which can be a months long or even year-long process depending on the scope of the project. And then +1 to the points that Ahmed was making about language skills and or built-in access to paid interpretation. And then Rachel points out that speaking for CCC as an affordable housing developer, I think that's Central City Concern. We often need to be able to pull together and finalize our financing package up to 18 months before construction completion, e.g. when used in conjunction with LIHTC dollars. So we need to be able to go into finance closing knowing we can count on those rebate dollars to be available when ready to pay invoices. And then Kate says program direct administration funding should be used to resource community-based organizations to hire staff to conduct outreach, audits, act as navigators, hire contractors, and more. That is local and culturally specific. Be clear in the program, CBOs can do more than just outreach in these programs. All right. That is that for the chat, and I don't see any hands up, so I think we can go to the next slide. And do we have 2 more? There's one more after that's general. Is that right? Well,
yeah, I believe that there's just one
just
general one.
keeping an eye on the clock. We have about 13 minutes left. So how can Odo support the development of a workforce that can deliver these rebates? And we talked a fair amount about market transformation earlier, but speaking too fast. Market transformation earlier, but how can the rebates deliver sustained market transformation that creates long-term demand for efficient technologies? So Clay has his hand up. I'll get to you in 1 second, Clay. I did get a comment kind of harkening back to Rachel's comment from Central City Concern. A program design element for HERE rebates for projects like yours could be that a specific amount of the funds was set aside to be used by LIHTC funded projects, similar to how the Oregon Housing Community Services Multifamily Efficiency Program operates. And Jeremy Anderson notes that one way we can take care of these items is design a stable program versus boom and bust that pushes for higher efficiency standards versus federal minimums. Clay, you can go off mute, or once we get you off mute, I'll let you know. Okay, you're up.
Hi. Certainly there's a workforce that's already available with at-scale retailers. And of course, they're hiring from local populations. So that has to be leveraged, especially for, lifestyle products like stoves and so on. And then that also translates into sustained market transformation, because those retailers are going to be stocking products that are selling like hotcakes, which will, be highly rebated HERE products.
Okay, thanks, Clay. And I don't see anything else in the chat or hands up. I don't know how fast we want to move on.
Yeah, let's move on, and then we can just kind of open it up generally, and we can always come back to
Yes, the next one's general, right? Great. As we transition slides, Zach's pointing out working with unions, contractors, and sellers to understand the rebates. One thing I'll just point out that's really interesting, most residential work is not union work in Oregon. So multifamily often can be, but anyway, it is just kind of interesting because we partner closely with unions in a lot of our work, like in the Capitol and such, and have found that they say this is the case, although there's apparently an example of one local that has some residential folks in maybe Central Oregon. So anything else you want to make sure we consider that hasn't already come up, or anything that you're still working on typing? There is a quote to create an application path for multifamily projects to be treated as single project application versus unit by unit. Clay, we'll get you off mute. And then David, we'll come to you next. Clay, you're up.
Yeah, keeping in the forefront through these program rollout designs, behavioral science and consumerism and your digital channels, and really getting a sense of what that experience is like from a consumer point of view. Are they having what could be viewed as a fun experience, which is shopping, or are they having kind of more of an academic experience trying to read through a program page on the state website and try to connect the dots themselves?
Great, thanks, Clay. David, you are up.
Thanks. I just wanted to reply to the market transformation piece that was on the last slide. And I think to me, having the improved performance of the homes and residential units and apartment buildings get documented in a way that then the other parts of the economy, the real estate, finance, appraising world can use that documentation, will have a lasting impact beyond the days of the rebates. So we do work with national mortgage entities, and they ask us, when is there going to be more consistent documentation of improved performance, so that they can actually scale up their funding of those improvements through the mortgage process. So there's real opportunity that if we scale up providing consistent documentation, that could be the home energy score, it could be the home energy score plus other things, but it'll enable that market to actually bring its resources to bear, to enable people to have another option to fund work. Thanks.
Thanks, David. All right, we do have a suggestion that getting the income requirements for LMI for here, like out in the public as soon as we know them so that people can know how to plan. Should they get it? Are they income qualified or should they just go ahead with the tax credits? And then another thought, focus on helping installing contractors verify income without taking on the risk of selling and installing to someone who ends up not qualifying. People might not be fully honest on their income, could result in a contractor taking an $8,000 loss. And then Larry's mentioning, like he mentioned yesterday, a creation of a contractor portal with all up-to-date info and lots of FAQs. Kind of learning from our experience with rental heat pumps. So really great to hear these ideas. You know, we based that program on an existing program that we have. And so we thought it would be smooth, but apparently it hasn't been. So we'll work on providing some more information for that one. And also great to see examples in addition to just FAQs. All right, well, we're kind of getting to the end here. We're happy to stay on and have don't limit that very useful portal Larry is advocating for to contractors. Nancy's saying don't limit that useful portal Larry is advocating for to contractors. Fair, totally. And then reservation is a great idea for rental program. It just needs to be fine-tuned. So thanks for that, Larry. And then, yeah, I totally agree. We rushed to get it out and going, and now we're doing a lot of that work to make it easier for our staff too, who are also dealing with contractors that are frustrated. So, okay. So what I was getting ready to do is move us to the next slide. And I'm wondering, Steph, if you'd be willing to copy the links into the chat from this last slide. I don't have the slide deck open, unfortunately, to do that. But essentially, we want to make sure, you know, our door's totally open. If you want to talk about the homes program, that's Stephanie, or here, that's Will. If you're not sure which program, contact both of them. We have a comment portal with many of the same questions you've seen over the past 3 days or just today, depending on when you've joined us for these conversations. We also have a link to the page where we'll be posting a recording of this webinar, and the recordings from yesterday's and last week's webinars are also found there. Will's got the links, so he's taking care of getting the links into the chat for us. Thanks, Will. And with that, if folks can start to go as they're ready to go. If you have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand and we can take you off mute in this last couple minutes. And then we also will just keep an eye on anything else coming up in the chat. And big thanks to Stephanie and Emily and Will for, Stephanie and Emily and Abby for all the help behind the scenes, and Will for answering lots of questions and thinking about lots of things today. But we're mostly super grateful to everyone who's taken the time to be here and have this long conversation with us. More to come.
Yeah, I'll just echo that and say thank you so much. This was really good feedback and we really appreciate that and look forward to being in touch.
Ahmed, we're going to find you. Have a good day. And for those still on the line, just a heads up that we're planning on taking a look at items from the comment portal, working to kind of put together a straw man proposal or straw proposal. And then we'll be getting the gang back together again to talk through that straw proposal and poke holes at it, think of the things we're not missing, really make sure we're getting all of your expert advice. Rafa wants to know, how can we be sure to be notified? If you got an email notice about this opportunity, you'll get those email notices in the future. And the other thing is that if you're not getting emails from us, if you just heard about this randomly, I was going to try to find the sign up for a newsletter thing, but I think it'll just take me too long. So I'm just going to give you my email and you can write me and I'll send you the link to sign up for our email notifications.
Yeah, and I'll add that on that bottom link to our webpage. You'll be able to find where you can also sign up for those.
Yeah. I imagine we'd probably be pretty smart to do something like email the people who came to the original webinars too. So, but I don't know if we always do that. All right, well, it's 4 o'clock. I bet folks have places to go, and I know I do. But thank you so much for the time. And again, for everyone who's here still sticking with us to the bitter end, and stay tuned for more. We'll be in touch.